everybody.
How's your con going? Tired yet?
No.
Tired is for the weak.
That's right.
Fear is for others.
It's true.
This is for the tired.
It's not the years, it's the mileage. All right, let's get started with Indiana Jones, the hilarious history. I'm not going to talk about, how movies. I'm not going to talk about how the movies came from serials, because I'm sure you all in the room know that these movies were derived from old adventure serials of the 30s and 40s. I want to focus on the hilarious stuff that happened during the making of these movies. And if you've seen this movie 100 or 200 times like I have, or this series of adventures, you might have spotted some things. So we're going to call them out. It all started with Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981. And we know it's about finding the Ark of the Covenant, but movies rarely hit the screen exactly as they were conceived, for better or worse. It's set in 1936, just as World War II is going to start ramping up. Indiana Jones himself was at one time a much harder-edged character in these movies. The original conception of Jones was that he was an alcoholic who also fraternized with his own students. He fraternized with his own students. That was cut out by Steven Spielberg in the development process. They wanted to tone that down. In this original scene with Marcus, when he comes to Jones's house to tell him that he's going to go look for the Lost Ark, the original idea was that he's going to come in, Indy's in a smoking jacket, and there's a young lady there, the same lady who said, "I love you," in the classroom. But they cut that because they didn't want Indy to be creepy.
I think it was a good choice.
And similarly, they wanted him to be have an alcohol problem, which you kind of see after he thinks Marion gets blown up in Cairo, but that's as close as it gets. The rest of that was removed.
So does everyone recognize the puppy dog? His name is Indiana, so that's a clue. That's where we get the name Indiana Jones, is from George Lucas's dog. He was also the inspiration for Chewbacca as well. So,
yeah, a lot of the scenes from Temple of Doom were actually the leftovers from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then they just ported over the action scenes from that they couldn't fit in. The most notable one being the falling raft from the airplane. The idea was that Indy was going to get in the plane and put his hat over his eyes and fall asleep, and then that spy that's on the plane behind the Life magazine was going to sabotage the plane. Indy was going to wake up and find himself alone in the airplane, a la Temple of Doom. He was going to jump out in the raft was going to inflate, go riding down the mountain, and then it was going to roll right up to, I believe it was Marion's bar, which George Lucas recycled for Willow, where Madmartigan falls off the sled and then he becomes a human snowball and rolls right up to the building. There was also supposed to be a German Gestapo officer with a robotic arm. He was supposed to have a full-on mecha arm, and this never made it past the conceptual stage, which is really too bad because it would have made this scene so much more meta.
I fought with this man. He had a mechanical arm. You find this man. You find this man.
This would have made that better. So I don't know. This is supposed to be 1936 Cairo. They filmed this in Kairouan, Tunisia. I don't know if you can spot the anomaly in this shot, though, but this guy does not look like he's from 1936 Cairo. He's wearing bell-bottom jeans and an undershirt. There's like a whole group of these guys. It was very hard to get the local Tunisian population out of all the streets all the time. They did put up the fences and did try to costume as many people as possible, but sometimes things just get through, and that's not a still from the movie. That's an actual screen grab from the film itself. So when you're watching it, suddenly this dude just goes sauntering by a la Saturday Night Fever, and you're like, what is going on?
And now you will see it every time you watch the movie.
Don't say that. They're going to start leaving. This is kind of a cool little glitch that I've noticed in the movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the only film in which Indiana Jones carries two different pistols. He does this for a logical reason because his revolver only has 6 shots, and then he has it's actually a Browning high power, but some people call it a 1911 Colt. But in the bar scene in Nepal, the moment he starts firing, it's a revolver, then it's an automatic, then it's a revolver, then it's an automatic. Then he reaches into his jacket to finally pull out the automatic because he's run out of bullets in the revolver. We've got the clip here, it makes it more clear. Automatic, revolver, there's revolver, revolver, automatic, revolver, automatic. Very confusing. Yeah. So, the monkey in the movie, we all remember him because not only does he try to betray our heroes, but he also really knows how to throw up that Hitler salute. He's really excited to be in the movie. And at one point, he gets really excited to be in the movie. I don't know if you can see, you're focused on his face. You might want to look lower. So the movie gives us the whip and the nay-nay.
Watch me nay-nay. Watch me whip. Watch me nay-nay.
That's enough.
What?
You didn't end on that?
There's more.
We're just getting started. So normally giant boulders aren't so bouncy. You watch the shadow there, just goes bouncing down the hill. I think it's because they realized that Indiana Jones wasn't Superman and couldn't push a rock that wasn't made of rubber. You ever notice this guy sleeping right by the exit? I found out through some research years ago, and I couldn't find the images, unfortunately, but there was a deleted scene where after he starts pushing the rock out, and there is a Egyptian digger that's sitting there just resting, and he starts to see this rock start coming out of the wall, and he's like, what? And as the rock comes out, he looks in, Indy looks out, Indy sees him and just punches him in the face. So he's actually not sleeping, he's unconscious. This is a fun one. I don't know if you've ever noticed when Indy's opening up the Ark, he has two people watching him, R2-D2 and C-3PO. They were carved into the pillars of the Ark shrine, and they actually also made it into the Kenner toy line on the Ark cover as well. So the guys at Kenner sculpted them into their toy line too, which is pretty cool. All right, now we have to get to one of the ones that makes no sense to me at all. And this is one that when I tell people who haven't seen it, they don't believe me. And then I have to show them, and then they're like, holy crap, that actually happened. This is one where Indy has just successfully stolen the truck carrying the Ark. And then he brings it back to Cairo, and the Egyptians help him camouflage it as he pulls into the courtyard. The staff car holding Belloc and the Nazi spy comes driving into town around the fountain. When it does, the spy in the front passenger seat is initially a human being, and then suddenly he's a dummy.
A really bad dummy.
That guy in the front seat in the bottom picture no longer has a head. It's just a hat on top of, I assume, a melon or something. So we're going to show this to you in motion because you have to see it for real. Person in the car comes around. So there's a person there. That is a dummy. And then there's a person again. Would anybody like a replay on that? Would you like a replay? All right, play it one more time. Person in the car.
That's a dummy.
That's a dummy. That's a dummy. There's nobody there. Person in the car.
So like there was no one around that they could just say, hey, could you put this hat on and sit in the car for one? I mean, what?
Yeah, and they verified this. This isn't like an optical trick, like, you know, you're speculating that something's wrong, like, you know, Han's vest in the freeze chamber. This is a real thing. They've admitted to it. They're like, yeah, it was a dummy. I'm like, did he run off to the bathroom and you just didn't want to take the time to wait? It's a weird production glitch. You'd think they could find somebody. The other one that's fun is how did Indy get from the submarine to the island? the scene was cut and you just see him get on the top of the submarine, and the next thing you know, he's soaking wet. It's because he actually used his whip to tie himself to the periscope. And this scene was filmed, but it was cut. You can actually see the full scene in the Marvel Comics adaptation from 1981. This is an image from it. It's really lucky for him that they didn't lower the periscope, because I would imagine that's what they would have done if they're secretly going off to an island to use the Ark. And then you have another shocker that it blew my mind. They were going to kill Sala in this movie. Sala was supposed to be executed by the German soldiers. There's a great story he tells, though, because John Rhys Davies talks about this. They had him, after the Ark is found by Belloc, and Sala's up there at the top, like this, and they try and trap Indy and Marion down in the Well of Souls. They take Sala off to a palm tree, and they put him in front of it, and this German soldier is supposed to execute him firing squad style. Now, I know you're like, how is this going to get funny, Michael? John Rhys Davies, like many members of the crew in Tunisia, got dysentery or cholera or Montezuma's revenge or something. And he says he was standing there, just with the runs, like he was trying to hold it together. And they said, you know what? For this shot, we really need you to kneel down about an extra 6 inches. And he was like, oh, this isn't good. And so he said he knelt and, quote, filled his jalaba in front of 100 people. And he said he didn't care. And then afterwards, they decided that Sala's actually a really great character. So they refilmed it so that you actually see him with them at the dock later. So they clearly rethought this during production of the movie, so that's good. The dysentery and the diarrhea didn't stop with Sala, with John Rhys Davies. Harrison Ford got it as well. As a matter of fact, everybody on the crew got it except for Steven Spielberg, because Steven Spielberg was so paranoid about illness. He had a pallet load of Chef Boyardee brought over to Tunisia. No lie, he ate it cold. And he taped his nose and mouth shut in the shower so that he wouldn't get any water in his mouth. He only drank bottled water. Everybody else went into town. They ate the local cuisine, and they all got sick. And so Harrison Ford was sick during the fight with the swordsman, which is why he ends up shooting him. You probably have heard the story a million times, but they had an entire fight scene. He couldn't do it. You actually see him in the movie flop sweating during the shot. Like, he wipes his brow and he's miserable. That's not acting. That's cholera. Like, that's And he finally says, can we just shoot this guy so that we can move on? But I've actually cobbled together all the rare clips that were filmed from this fight scene for you, so that you can sort of see what it would have been like. Yeah, so it was supposed to be this more involved fight. He wasn't supposed to just blow him away in the street, because then you wonder, like, where are the cops? Like, this is ridiculous. The Indiana Jones toy line was very cool. It came out from Kenner in 1982, but it wasn't very successful on store shelves. Part of that was due to the fact that Marion and Indy themselves were very hard to find. They seemed to be short-packed, almost like the Snake Eyes and Scarlet of the line. So it didn't last very long. And also these rare collector glasses. Remember in the 80s when we used to go to fast food restaurants and you get your collector glasses for the different movies? They couldn't even successfully sell these to fast food restaurants. These are sales sample prototypes. They never made it into fast food restaurants. It's amazing to think that a movie as successful as Raiders of the Lost Ark had so much merchandising resistance up against it. We also had the first Indiana Jones arcade, or not arcade game, but video game with Raiders of the Lost Ark from Atari 2600. This game I find hilarious because it looks more like a surrealist painting than it does an Indiana Jones anything. And you had to control him with controller number 2 rather than controller number 1. So when I went over to my next door neighbor's house to play this thing, he would descend from the ark, as in that lower photo, and then he would never move. And then this snake would just show up, and I'd be like, move, move! And he wouldn't move, and he'd just die. And I was like, this is the worst game ever. because I
That's
didn't know
Atari.
to use the other controller. All right, we're moving on to a film that I know a lot of people before Crystal Skull came out said was their number 3. No, I guess it's still their number 3 in a lot of cases. Temple of Doom took everything, as we said, left over from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it ported it over into this script, including the minecart chase, which was supposed to happen at the end of Raiders. This was a very different movie, and they intended for it to be a very different movie. Indiana Jones has to save enslaved children from a cult and retrieve these magical stones that have been stolen from an Indian village. It was produced for $28 million, and it grossed a record-breaking $45.7 million in the first week of release. It was the third most successful movie of 1984, behind Beverly Hills Cop and Ghostbusters. But it's remembered with derision and wincing expressions on faces because of certain things. I really like this movie. I love it for its go for broke style. In the opening scene, it becomes the only Indiana Jones movie to start with this Busby Berkeley style musical number, and it's the only indie movie to actually use the logo font as the title. Every other one uses that white serifed, elegant, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade, but this is the only one that actually is like, it's telling you, whoosh, we're Indiana Jones! Like, it's cool. It's also the movie that ended up creating the PG-13 rating, because it was so dark, and you had the hearts being ripped out, and you had people eating snakes and bugs, and Spielberg got into a debate with the Motion Picture Association of America and said, look, my film is not an R. And they were like, well, he said, look, in the future, because what they did was they gave him a concession. It was rated PG, but on the posters it said, this film may be too intense for young children. And he said, look, can we do like a PG-14 or something like that? And so they eventually agreed on a PG-13. And so from Temple of Doom, we get the PG-13 rating. Is it really darker than Raiders, though? I mean, really? I mean, you've got a guy's head explode at the end. You've got a guy getting chewed up by a propeller. You've got people melting. You've got people blowing up. I mean, it's not exactly that much darker than Raiders. It's just it was delivered in a different way, and I think that's what people remember.
But it's not the only time that Lucas has gone a little too far towards the dark side with a movie that's supposedly made for children.
Sometimes you just don't have that gauge, The gross food scene is remembered for the monkey brains and the eyeball soup and the bugs, and this has since been talked about as a scene that caused a lot of cultural tensions. The country of India would not allow this movie to even be made in their country. They saw the script, they reviewed it, and they said no. And so they filmed all the exteriors in Sri Lanka instead. You also have Willie, which is a big point of contention. I'm surprised I didn't hear the when I said Willie. They wanted Marion back. Spielberg wanted Marion to come back, but Lucas wanted somebody different. He wanted a different character overall. And even though Kate Capshaw herself is not a blonde, Lucas insisted that she dye her hair to be blonde and that she not be tough as nails like Marion.
I think he kind of had that idea of like Bond girls, like that the girl was going to change every movie, and so they just wanted a totally different vibe.
There were a few errors in this film that the production team couldn't control. For example, that beautiful dress that Kate Capshaw wears in the beginning, for some reason they shuffled the production schedule around and filmed in Sri Lanka and on some sets first. And when they did, they dressed the campfire set with the dress hanging from a tree in the background. They didn't pay attention while they were filming and didn't notice that the elephant on set started to eat the dress. And the dress was made from authentic 1920s and 30s sequins and beads and all this kind of stuff that were irreplaceable. Yeah, so rather than wait for the elephant to take a dump, they instead sent the dress back to the designer. She had just enough material to redesign the dress and make it a backless dress, which is why the dress is backless in the dance sequence, because an elephant ate the back out of it. And then another thing that we should mention is that Kate Capshaw has admitted that she didn't actually read the script when she accepted the role. And so she got to Sri Lanka, and there was this scene where they said, okay, now we're going to do the scene where you get you get a snake wrapped around you in a lake. And she said, I'm sorry, what? What snake? And they said, did you not read? She's like, I thought I just, So she panicked. Spielberg, liking her obviously, told her that she didn't have to do the scene, but she had to do the bugs. And she said, the bugs? She hadn't read anything from the script. So when she did the bugs, she was totally hopped up on relaxers. Just telling you. That's her own admission. So one of the big problems in the movie for a lot of people is Willie screaming. So we just thought we'd count them, see if it's really that bad. So it is a problem. It is a problem. And now we have it on record. So remember that number, people, 30. It was a cool story, though, how they cast Short Round. They actually didn't intend to audition Ke Huy Quan. They were auditioning his older brother. But his older brother couldn't speak English. They were Vietnamese, and he was younger and had picked up more of the English language, and so he was translating for his brother. And he was very, charismatic and precocious, and Steven Spielberg kept looking at him. And so Steven Spielberg finally said, can we have your younger kid instead? And so the younger son got the role. So that's kind of a cool idea. It's a little feel-good story. I love it. Marhan, credited as Shaman, was played by a renowned Indian actor who Sri Lankan actor who I won't disrespect by trying to pronounce his name because I don't want to mispronounce it. But he didn't speak a word of English. And so Spielberg actually had to walk him through every scene with phonetics. He would just give him the syllables and he would give him the timing. And so that's why the actor actually speaks in that sort of paused cadence, because he's actually talking and he knows, it moves, darkness. And that's because it moves, and then do this, darkness, and then he says dark. So he actually, for what he had to deal with his language barrier, his performance is brilliant coming off that barrier. But there's a hidden legacy with Temple of Doom that I got to talk about, because it's actually not a prequel or a sequel to Indiana Jones, either in production or mythology. It's actually a sequel to Gunga Din, the Cary Grant adventure movie. It starts with a gong, like Gunga Din does. There is a fight in a bar over in one case, a map to a buried treasure, in the other case, the diamond that Lao Che has. There is a village that has been wiped out, or in the case of this, put into famine and ruin. There's an elephant ride. There's a palace. In the case of the Gunga Din, it's a palace of gold. In Indiana Jones, it's Pankot Palace. The heroes are Indiana Jones and Short Round and Cary Grant and Gunga Din, who, incidentally, in the actual source material for this story, is supposed to be a young water boy. He's not supposed to be this 50-year-old guy. I don't know what that's all about. And then there's a cult ceremony that they witness. There's the idol of Kali. There is a guru, and they film him from the exact same angles. They are tortured. The hero is tortured and whipped while being strapped to this stone. There is a rope bridge that they have to traverse to escape. The Thuggees are the center point villains of the film. They're called the Thuggees in both movies. And then the British show up at the end to save them from the Thuggee army. The production team on Temple of Doom didn't try to hide this. They didn't try to gank Gunga Din's plot and pretend like it was an original idea. They say in the movie, during the banquet scene, there's a British officer who's sitting next to Indiana Jones. And he says, the Thuggee were an obscenity that worshipped Kali with human sacrifice. The British army nicely did away with them. That's Gunga Din. So I just love that. It's a really cool connection that Temple of Doom has to film history. Another problem with the movie was that Harrison Ford was injured early on because, by his own admission, he insisted on having the elephants in the movie and he wanted to ride them. When he did, it spread his legs real far apart and torqued his spine, and he didn't realize that he had actually herniated his back. He didn't figure that out until the scene in the apartment where he was doing stunt work with the Thuggee guard, and the guy tries to choke him, and then Indy does the flip to the floor, and then the Thuggee flips back over him. At that moment, Harrison Ford lets out this awful cry, according to Steven Spielberg, and collapsed. So for most of the shooting of the movie, for several months while he was having experimental surgery on his back, his stuntman, Vic Armstrong, stood in for him. And if you look at the lower photograph that's from the movie, that's Vic Armstrong in the spike room scene. That's not Indiana Jones or Harrison Ford. And that's how close they look. People on the set used to get them mixed up all the time. They'd say, Harrison, Harrison. The guy wouldn't turn around. They'd be like, what a jerk. And then he would turn around and be like, oh, sorry. Temple of Doom is also notable because it was so well merchandised. They realized their mistake from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so they merchandised the crap out of Temple of Doom. They had the collector glasses at the fast food restaurants. They had the storybooks and the comics, the action figures. They had 2 different Nintendo games. But this was short-lived. These are the LJN Temple of Doom action figures, and this is all we got. We were supposed to have a minecart chase playset and Short Round and Willie, but just by looking at Indy, I mean, he looks like Kojak. He doesn't even look like Indiana Jones. They're just doofy-looking characters, but they have that lever on their back, so like the Thundercats figure. So when you pull the lever, they do this kind of number. It's called Battle-matic action. Around this time in the mid-'80s, Temple of Doom's success combined with Raiders spawned a lot of wannabes. You had the Goonies, you had Romancing the Stone, Tales of the Gold Monkey, High Road to China, which is fun because Tom Selleck was originally supposed to be Indiana Jones, but Magnum P.I. Was keeping him busy. And then you had the Sphinx, which I can't remember who was in it, but no one remembers that movie anyway. But the most notable ripoff of Indiana Jones were the Golden Globus movies with Richard Chamberlain and Sharon Stone, King Solomon's Mines, and Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold. These were based on the original H. Rider Haggard character, Alan Quatermain, from King Solomon's Mines. There have been several movies made of King Solomon's Mines before this one had been done, but this one is clearly an attempt to capitalize on Indiana Jones. So if you remember the scene in Raiders where Marion hides in the basket, and then she's carried off by the Egyptian assassins, and Indy starts chasing all the different baskets through Cairo, keep that in your mind. And I'm about to show you a scene from King Solomon's Mines.
Get out of my way. Take that drop. Sorry, wrong color.
He's chasing around rug carriers because Sharon Stone's been rolled up in a rug, and the movie, as you can see, it's low budget schlock. I mean, it's typical Golden Globus. I mean, these are the guys that gave us Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo.
No, it's a classic.
They also gave us Ninja 3: The Domination. They gave us the live action Masters of the Universe. They gave us Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. But even just look at the look at the poster. I mean, they just took a photo of Harrison Ford and just repainted it with Richard Chamberlain on it. So Steven Spielberg, he rejected doing Rain Man and Big because he was really excited about doing Last Crusade. He really wanted to follow up Temple of Doom with what he felt was going to be a better movie. I don't have a popular opinion about this movie. It's not totally relevant to this discussion, but I do like to call this movie Diet Raiders. The reason I say that is because this movie goes back to the Raiders formula. It patterns itself after Raiders while staying lighter in the comedy. So I'm not trying to be derogatory. What I'm saying literally is it is Diet Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is Raiders without the edge. It's more of a father-son story, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was an immense success. The original concepts for Last Crusade or Indiana Jones 3 were very different. You want to walk them through this?
Yeah, Lucas wanted to do a haunted house movie, and so they had him facing off against a Scottish ghost in some of the first drafts of the movie. Spielberg wasn't really thrilled about that because he had already done Poltergeist, and so he was like, yeah, I've already done that. But the focus of the plot was around the Fountain of Youth. And Spielberg brought in the screenwriter Christopher Columbus, who had worked on The Goonies with him before, and he fleshed out the Scottish ghost idea, but then replaced the Fountain of Youth with the Peaches of Immortality, which is an ancient construct of Chinese mythology. Is that random enough for you guys? I mean, it also had all of these cannibalistic African tribes and a 200-year-old pygmy in the original script. So it was a really, really different, bizarre movie. There was a deadly chess game with human people where the Monkey King challenges Indy to this big game of chess, and the people who real people suffer quite a sour fate if they're captured, things like that, which is interesting because serendipitously, Chris Columbus went on to direct the same idea in The Sorcerer's Stone.
If they had done the Peaches idea, I would hope that at the climax, as they find the Grove of Peaches, that suddenly ninjas jump out of the peach trees and just start fighting Indiana Jones, and then the Presidents of the United States of America song starts playing.
Yeah, that would be great.
You got it. Yeah, delayed reaction. It's a humor grenade. Okay. So walk us through this one.
So additionally, this version saw Indy getting hitched to an archaeologist named Dr. Claire Clark, who was a Katharine Hepburn type and who may or may not have been the basis for Sophia Hapgood in the 90s video games and in the Dark Horse comics.
Yeah, Sophia Hapgood was the love interest in the Fate of Atlantis video game and comics. So we're wondering if she was inspired by this Claire Clark character.
The next version of the script had Indy getting married to a nun. So Spielberg had replaced Columbus with the Color Purple screenwriter, and he had introduced elements such as the Holy Grail and the character of Henry Jones Sr., and that script concluded with Indy's father rising to heaven upon discovering the Grail, and then Indy marrying a former nun named Chantal.
Was it Lucas? I think it was, Spielberg. Spielberg was the one who was afraid that a story about the Holy Grail would just conjure up images of Monty Python. And so it took him a while to get behind the idea. He just didn't want people to immediately default to this kind of stuff. So go ahead.
So there was this guy who is really well known within Hollywood for being kind of a screen doctor, and he's a celebrated playwright. His name is Tom Stoppard, and he contributed to Episode 3 and also Sleepy Hollow, but they did have him come in and work on the rapport between Indy and his father because they really felt like that was the core of the movie, and that part really needed to be strong.
Yeah, and then you have Pat Roach, who is mysteriously missing from The Last Crusade. And the reason we bring this up is because he is the big bad in all of the Indiana Jones movies. He plays the German mechanic next to the airplane. He plays the big thuggy guard that Indy has to fight on the conveyor belt in Temple of Doom. He was part of the Indy crew. He actually was in The Last Crusade. There was supposed to be an encounter between Indy and Pat Roach, but they cut it. Pat Roach is a Gestapo officer. If you look in the lower right, that's a shot from Last Crusade as it exists. So when Vogel shows up, he's with Pat Roach when they come to search the Zeppelin. The plot device centered around them going into the Zeppelin to look for Indy, and when they get in there, there's a World War I German flying ace who is 3 sheets to the wind, and he's singing with the piano player. Indy figures out that he and his dad have got to escape. They get out in the biplane, and the Gestapo officer's like, we've got to get after him. How are we going to do this? And the drunken World War I flying ace says, no problem, there's another biplane attached too. Let's just go do it. And he's like, all right, well, you're a pilot, right? And he's like, yeah. Well, the German flying ace is so drunk that when he detaches the plane, he forgets to actually turn the engine on first. So the plane plummets to the ground and blows up, and that would have been Pat Roach's moment in the movie. And I think they did that because they cut it because they realized it was superfluous, and Indy has this big fight with Vogel on the tank anyway, which sort of served the same purpose. You might have seen this picture a lot from Indiana Jones promotional material. This is another deleted scene from the movie. Do you remember the three trials of the Grail? You know, you have the Word of God, the Breath of God, the Path of God, or the Name of God. In the Name of God, the Path of God, the original danger was that when Indy would step on the wrong letter, it opened up and this spider came jumping out onto him, which sounds kind of weak unless you're like me and you really hate spiders, and then you're like, oh, I'd rather fall into a bottomless pit. But think about this. That spider is immortal, and it's been stuck in a shoebox-sized hole for 1,000 years. And when it gets out and it sees you, it's on. So they felt it wasn't intense enough, and so they changed it to a bottomless pit instead, that he falls through when he steps on the wrong letter. Yeah, the death of Walter Donovan was a benchmark in special effects history. It's considered the first complete digital composite shot in Hollywood history. And it is a really cool, haunting effect. And it took, what does that say there? It says it took a number of shots digitally melded.
It was filmed in several separate stages with a sped-up aging process, and then it was digitally melded together, along with shots of puppet heads. For some of the later stages, and then translated back to film as one cohesive take.
You can never have too many puppet heads.
Apparently not.
Yeah, so you had two other actors that were contenders for the role of Henry Jones Sr. You had the Doctor himself, and you had Gregory Peck. I think these were the backup choices in case Sean Connery wasn't available. But Sean Connery made himself available, and so they didn't have to reach out to Mr. Peck or the Doctor. Ronald Lacey, who you remember as the spy who burned his hand, he's also in the movie, briefly. He's also in The Empire Strikes Back. He's right there behind the guy who plays Hitler. The guy who plays Hitler in Last Crusade was in The Empire Strikes Back as Admiral Ozzel, who gets choked out by Darth Vader through the Force. Indy falls off the tank. The tank barrel has already been blown up by a rock that he shoved in it. So the tank barrel end is splayed like a bouquet of flowers. Like it's just... Indy falls off, grabs the tank barrel. His shoulder bag, or man purse, or whatever you want to call it.
It's European. It's not a purse.
It's actually, for those of you who Indy costume, would you come up here? Would you mind for a minute? We have an Indy costumer right here. I want to demo this. It's so good that we have... First of all, round of applause for this guy. Would you mind showing them how it's under the jacket? The bag is under the jacket, okay?
No barrel was getting through.
Right, exactly. So, thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you. So when he falls and grabs the barrel of the cannon and then falls again, and suddenly the bag is around the barrel, that's impossible unless somehow matter can move through matter in moments of duress, which I don't see that as happening. And then he just climbs back up and it comes over his shoulder and he's off of it again. No, he'd be stuck. He'd be like, I can't get up. This moment in the film you might remember is when Sean Connery reveals to Indy that he says, how did you know she was a Nazi? And Sean Connery says, she talks in her sleep. That line was improvised. In typical Sean Connery fashion, he was smooth, and he said that, and it brought the entire crew to a standstill laughing. And so Spielberg said, we're keeping that one. Before you wonder what you're looking at, the Last Crusade did not have merchandising for toys. They had an Arby's cup, like a soda cup. They had replica hats. They had replica jackets for adults. But an enterprising toy company called Star Toys out of Spain, they licensed the name Indiana Jones and made 3 very interesting Indiana Jones action figures. One comes with an alligator. A number of them are jacked up like The Rock. And they come with big machine guns. And I love the one that comes with a Timex digital watch. It's like, it's almost like they had a bunch of watches left over from another bad product they did. And they're like, just put them with this Indy figure. It'll be fine. How many people actually like this show? Raise your hands. Halfway? How many people don't like this show?
How many people have never heard of this show? Okay.
Okay. This show came out in the early 90s, and it was an attempt to... George Lucas had 2 objectives with this show. One was to educate the viewers about history by having Indiana Jones kind of be like a Forrest Gump character in the sense that he runs into historical figures a lot and has adventures in those time periods around those historical figures of the early 20th century. The other thing he wanted to do was use it as a testing ground for his new digital effects houses and his new digital effects techniques, much like he did with the Star Wars Trilogy Special Edition. It's hit or miss, because sometimes you get episodes where Indy is this little kid, and sometimes you get episodes where Indy is Boondock Saints Sean Patrick Flannery. The Sean Patrick Flannery episodes are the better ones, just in case you were wondering. But it is actually a decent show. It propelled a lot of people's careers early on, like Catherine Zeta-Jones. If you can get it, it's on DVD. They've been re-edited in typical George Lucas fashion. They originally started as Indy, as an old man with an eye patch on at a museum, and he would tell kids stories about his adventures, which would then lead into the episode of the week. Well, then when George Lucas decided to keep Indiana Jones on adventures well into his 70s, apparently, he realized he didn't want the old man with the eye patch in the show anymore. So he cut him out and turned them into television movies. And so when you see them on DVD, they've been re-edited. But they're still very watchable. They're very good. Oh, yeah.
That's my favorite.
Have you ever been punched in the face? Like really punched in the face? I mean, how many people... we're not going to ask this question to target anybody, because there's no judgment here. Okay, there's none. I brought a lightsaber on my belt to this panel. Okay, there's no judgment here. How many of you in this audience actually like this movie? Okay.
I enjoy it.
Okay, cool. Okay. All right.
It has good moments.
It does. So Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not the first title they came up with. They went through a number of drafts over the 20 years it took to get this movie made. Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. The untitled M. Night Shyamalan version, which I'm calling Indiana Jones and the Ultimate Twist. Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods. Indiana Jones and the Destroyer of Worlds.
Okay, I watched that movie.
Indiana Jones and the Son of Indiana Jones. That's real.
I watched that too. That last was a punk, right?
They were in... No, it's real. They were in development hell with Indiana Jones 4. Where do you take this character? George Lucas wanted to do an homage to 1950s science fiction alien invasion serials. Harrison Ford and Steven Spielberg weren't so thrilled with that idea. But George Lucas played this game of chicken, and as you know, the man won't blink. So he got his way. They wanted Sean Connery to be in the movie. He politely said, "I'm retired."
He was 78.
He was 78, and so they have this moment where, because Marcus, the actor who played Marcus Denholm Elliott, because he had passed away and Sean Connery wasn't in the movie, they just killed them off through a scene where he looks at some photographs on his desk. And the scene to me plays out as, remember when we made these movies you really liked?
Keep remembering them. You're going to need it.
It's no longer the Nazis; it's the Russians, because we're in the 50s, and you have Kate Blanchett showing up as the big bad. She has the accent where she talks like the girl from Russia, and she's Ukrainian. There are no Nazis per Spielberg, because after Schindler's List, Spielberg said, "I'm not making Nazis an action adventure villain anymore. They're a serious villain." This also creates the phrase "nuking the fridge," which is now a real cinematic pop culture phrase. It's not replacing it. It sits on the shelf with "Jump the Shark." Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Spielberg actually says that he's proud of that. He's proud that he created a phrase that would take the place of "Jump the Shark" and bring that into popular culture. So I don't know what that says about Steven Spielberg. He's just a sadist, I think. I don't know.
He's a big kid.
I like that refrigerator, though.
You like the refrigerator?
So I don't know if anybody heard about this when this happened, but Shia LaBeouf was not actually a fan of this movie and publicly badmouthed the movie at the Cannes Film Festival to reporters. He told the reporters, "I feel like I dropped the ball on the legacy that people loved and cherished. You get to monkey swinging and things like that, and you can blame it on the writer and you can blame it on Steven, but the actor's job is to make it come alive and work, and I couldn't do it. So that's my fault. Simple." And later, Harrison Ford said, "He was an effing idiot. As an actor, I think it's my obligation to support the film without making a complete ass of myself." Okay.
The one thing we did get from Crystal Skull that I think everybody was happy about was the fact that it compelled Hasbro to make new toys of all the Indiana Jones movies. And so we were able to get toys from Raiders, Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade, and, for better or worse, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. They front-loaded the shipments to stores, though, with Crystal Skull merchandise. And so you had Uga Warriors and Shia LaBeouf in great numbers that just couldn't sell. You also had these alien figures on thrones that were special mail-aways. You also had this. That was actually a premium adult collectible from, I believe, Sideshow. And they actually sold out. I do not. And I would never lie to you. So, yeah. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles became canon because of the Crystal Skull. There's a moment in the film where Shia LaBeouf and Harrison Ford have landed in Peru, and they're walking down a city street, and he's asking Indy about his past, and he says, "Yeah, the last time I was here, in this area, I was fighting with Pancho Villa." That is a reference to the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. So that now legitimizes the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And like I said, the Sean Patrick Flannery episodes, especially those that take place in World War I, you've got to see them. They're great television. They really are very, very good. We have really enjoyed our time here at DragonCon. This is our last panel of this con. So for this year.
Rate us in the app.
Please rate us in the app if you like this. And thank you for being here. We can't thank you enough. Appreciate it.